the vaults of history lie doors we were never meant to open. Corridors sealed by ash, silence and ink struck black. Behind them linger whispers of lost fleets, buried bunkers, and files stamped to vanish from memory. These are fragments of a war that never truly ended, a hidden battlefield where shadows fought shadows, and truth itself became a casualty. Tonight, we step into that forbidden archive, where every secret carries the weight of a loaded weapon. In the summer of 1942, as the Battle of the Atlantic reached its height, the Arctic convoys were lifelines for the Soviet war effort. One of these, Convoy PQ-17, has been remembered as a catastrophe, an escort force ordered to scatter under Admiralty instructions, leaving merchantmen to be picked apart by U-boats and Luftwaffe bombers. More than 24 ships were lost in the Barents Sea. Yet amid the accepted narrative of blunder and tragedy lies a smaller, far stranger episode: the disappearance of an escort detachment whose absence was quietly erased from official records. The British convoy system relied on a mix of destroyers, corvettes, and trawlers to shepherd vulnerable merchantmen through ice-choked seas. PQ-17's escort roster is well documented in public sources. Destroyers such as HMS Keppel, HMS Leamington, and HMS Salamander. Cruisers HMS London and HMS Norfolk. And distant cover by the carrier Victorious and battleship Duke of York. Yet, a memorandum stamped Most Secret ADM 1999-2149 and declassified in the mid-1970s references an Auxiliary Detachment C commanded by Lieutenant CMDR R.H. Mallory. This detachment, consisting, according to the memo, of a pair of converted trawlers and a refitted Flower-class corvette, appears in no convoy rosters, no Admiralty war diary, and no post-war accounts. According to the memorandum, Detachment C was tasked with escorting special cargo aboard a British merchant vessel named Empire Viscount, a ship conspicuously absent from published lists of PQ-17 participants. Shipping registers from the Ministry of War Transport confirm that Empire Viscount was built in 1941, yet no record exists of her ultimate fate. Crew lists for the vessel vanish after June 1942. It is as though the ship and her escort were erased. What makes the disappearance more troubling are scattered Soviet references. In 1992, following the partial opening of Soviet military archives, a researcher named Sergei P. Golubev unearthed NKVD reports from Arkhangelsk. These documents describe a convoy vessel that never arrived, despite radio contact until 5 July 1942, with escorts identifying themselves as Mallory Detachment. Soviet signal operators reported hearing bursts of Morse traffic on 8.8 mm, a frequency usually reserved for Kriegsmarine U-boat wolfpacks. The logs noted confusion. Why would British escorts be transmitting on German channels? German sources provide further shadows. Kriegsmarine U-boat logs, particularly those recovered from the U-255 and U-408 patrol reports, contain redacted passages under Operation Regenbogen, the code word for the scuttling of the fleet in 1945. Among them is a cryptic reference to Geleit, mit besonderer Ladung versenkt, keine Gefangenen. Convoy with special cargo destroyed, no prisoners. The tonnage reported does not correspond to any merchant loss officially listed for PQ-17. The phrasing besondere Ladung, special cargo, was reserved in naval communications for material considered of extraordinary importance, often intelligence or weapons shipments. The human traces are equally unsettling. In the National Archives at Kew, among the personnel files of Royal Navy reservists, several records end abruptly in June 1942, stamped deleted ADM orders. Lieutenant CMDR Mallory himself appears only once, in a 1941 posting to HMS Vernon, the Royal Navy's torpedo and mine warfare school. Thereafter, no service history. Families of seamen assigned to trawlers requisitioned for Arctic duty recall receiving no death notices, merely silence. Some widows were issued pensions years later without official confirmation of loss, their husbands' names absent from memorial rolls. What then of the Empire Viscount's cargo. One clue lies in Foreign Office telegram FO 3711-31664, dated June 1942, concerning material consignment to Murmansk, priority scientific apparatus. Though details are vague, references to the Tube Alloys project, Britain's code word for its early atomic research, surface in related correspondence. It is conceivable that equipment or raw materials connected to nuclear research were being shipped under cover of standard convoy cargo. The Soviet Union, though an ally, was not trusted with full disclosure of such matters, and routing sensitive material north through the Arctic would have been the most discreet method available. By mid-July 1942, the Arctic Ocean was littered with wrecks and corpses. The sinking of PQ-17 was remembered as a disaster of mismanagement. Yet within that broader tragedy, the silence surrounding Detachment C and the Empire Viscount is conspicuous. No wreck has ever been located, though post-war Soviet expeditions claim to find unidentified debris fields north of Novaya Zemlya. Divers in the 1960s reported a steel hull with no markings, its plates warped by internal explosion rather than torpedo strike. But no confirmation followed. These reports were buried in Soviet naval intelligence files until 1991, when they briefly surfaced before being resealed. For decades, naval historians treated PQ-17 as a cautionary tale of command error. Only in the past 30 years have researchers pieced together the faint outlines of something more: a vanished escort force, a missing merchant ship, unexplained German references, and Soviet intercepts pointing to transmissions on enemy channels. Whether this was a case of mistaken identity, a failed special mission, or deliberate erasure remains unresolved. What endures is the void left in the record, hundreds of men unaccounted for, a vessel erased from registries, and a cargo that, if nuclear in nature, would have rewritten the timetable of the atomic age. In the words of historian Hugh Sebag Montefiore, war produces not just tragedies but absences, events that happened but are missing from history. The ghost convoy of Murmansk is one such absence, preserved only in fragments of intercepted signals, redacted logs, and the quiet grief of families who were never given a name on a memorial wall. When the Allied armies marched into the ruins of the Third Reich in 1945, they carried not only weapons, but dossiers. The Office of Strategic Services, the precursor to the CIA, began compiling personnel files on thousands of German scientists, engineers, and medical specialists. The program, later known as Operation Paperclip, is remembered for spiriting away men like Wernher von Braun, whose knowledge of V-2 rockets accelerated the American space program. Yet among the reams of declassified documents lies evidence of a parallel, darker roster, a black ledger of specialists whose names were deliberately omitted from the official narrative, men whose expertise was not in rocketry or aerodynamics, but in chemical warfare, human experimentation, and unconventional physics. In September 1946, the US Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, JIOA, issued Directive JIOA 32, authorizing the transfer of German scientists to the United States. Attached to this directive was an annex marked Restricted Handling. It listed 88 names, most of which appear in the well-known Paperclip rosters. Yet in a separate JIOA cable dated October 1946, archived under RG 330, Box 242, an additional set of 23 names is referenced as Category X, unassigned specialists. These individuals do not appear in any publicized Paperclip records. The cable stipulates their relocation to Site L and Site W. Coded designations later cross-reference to Sandia Base, New Mexico, and the Nevada Proving Grounds. Among the Category X scientists were men like Dr. Erich Trautmann, a medical officer attached to Dachau whose SS file, SS personnel roster, microfilm A3343, documented his role in hypothermia and altitude experiments on prisoners. Another, Dr. Hans Bethelt, not to be confused with the physicist Hans Bethe, was noted in an OSS interrogation transcript, file XL 112-29. as having conducted trials with nerve agents tabun and sarin at Daihanfurth. Their presence in American custody is suggested not in official immigration logs, but in internal Air Force correspondence, which describes foreign specialists conducting trial assemblies of dispersal devices in desert testing areas in 1947. The secrecy surrounding these men stemmed not from their irrelevance, but from the sensitivity of their expertise. In a memorandum dated March 12, 1947, Major General Alden H. Waite of the U.S. Chemical Corps wrote, "It is imperative that Category X individuals not be exposed to public or congressional scrutiny due to their wartime affiliations. Their knowledge is indispensable in forward field applications of gaseous and atmospheric devices." The phrase atmospheric devices recurs in several documents, none of which provide explicit detail. Later references in Declassified Atomic Energy Commission files mention field-ready atmospheric apparatus for rapid yield testing, language disturbingly reminiscent of primitive radiological dispersal concepts. Eyewitness accounts bolster the paper trail. In the early 1980s, former Sandia base technician Robert Daniels gave a recorded interview for the Los Alamos Historical Society. Daniels recalled the presence of German doctors under assumed names, housed separately from the von Braun contingent and rarely seen outside guarded compounds. He described crates stenciled with both US Army Ordnance symbols and faded Reichsadler eagles, containing glass apparatus, pressure chambers, and surgical equipment. Daniels's testimony, while anecdotal, aligns with surviving freight records that show anomalous shipments to Sandia in 1947, billed under the Department of Agriculture to disguise their true nature. The missing ledger also intersects with the early CIA. In 1951, Project Bluebird, later McUltra, sought chemical and psychological methods of interrogation. A CIA memorandum to Director Walter Bedell Smith references assistance from Category X medical specialists originally transferred under Paperclip. Among them, according to the note, was Dr. T, almost certainly Troutman, whose Dachau experience with hypothermia tests was being mined for interrogation resistance studies. The paper trail breaks here, but later Senate hearings into MKUltra contain oblique references to foreign specialists unavailable for testimony due to prior classifications. Why were these names omitted from the public Paperclip narrative? The likely answer lies in politics. The American public, already uneasy about recruiting men with Nazi affiliations, would have been outraged to learn that concentration camp doctors and chemical weapons experts were sheltered under new identities. The official story could tolerate von Braun, who was portrayed as a reluctant conscript working on rockets. It could not tolerate men like Troutman, who left behind hundreds of murdered prisoners in the name of science. Thus, their names were simply removed from the official list, their files buried in restricted annexes. The human dimension of this secrecy emerges in rare fragments. A 1949 immigration inquiry by the Justice Department noted discrepancies in the paperwork of several German arrivals at Sandia base. When the official in charge, Joseph B. Keenan, pressed the issue, the inquiry was abruptly closed with a note that security jurisdiction supersedes immigration authority. Families of some victims of Dachau and Daihanfurth experiments later attempted to pursue war crimes cases, only to find the accused had vanished without trace. In Nuremberg, only a handful of doctors were tried. Many others had already been extracted, under American custody, beyond the reach of justice. Even within the military, the presence of these men was concealed. A 1957 Pentagon review of chemical and radiological testing notes inconsistencies in attribution of technical reports, authors listed under initials only. Cross-referencing these initials with captured SS personnel rosters suggests that several classified reports attributed to FK and ET were authored by men on the Black Ledger. Their work influenced not only US chemical weapons doctrine, but early Cold War considerations of radiological warfare, concepts that were ultimately shelved, but not before tests were conducted in secrecy on the Nevada desert floor. Today, only fragments of the Black Ledger remain. Most of the names were redacted in the 1980s when the Department of Defense declassified large swaths of Paperclip files. Scholars piecing together the trail from surviving cables, witness accounts, and mismatched archival fragments conclude that at least 20 individuals entered US custody, lived under assumed identities, and died on American soil without their pasts ever being acknowledged. Unlike von Braun, they were not celebrated, not written into history books. They were shadows, men of dark expertise quietly folded into the American security state. The narrative of Paperclip has long been one of moral compromise, justified by Cold War necessity. Yet the Black Ledger reveals a harsher truth. Not all compromises were admitted, and some were hidden entirely. Beneath the triumph of rockets and space travel lay an underlayer of silenced men whose skills came not from laboratories of innovation, but from camps of death. Their knowledge was purchased at the cost of lives erased, and their presence in America remained one of the most carefully buried secrets of the early Cold War. By the early 1950s, as tensions between East and West hardened into the Cold War, intelligence services on both sides fought not only in embassies and spy rings, but in the airwaves. The Soviet Union's vast geography gave it an unparalleled advantage for deploying remote signals facilities, installations that could disappear into the tundra, manned by small detachments of troops and engineers, cut off from the outside world. Most of these sites were dismissed by Western analysts as primitive radar outposts or meteorological stations. Yet decrypted intercepts and fragments of Soviet military logs suggest that some of these locations concealed a much stranger fusion of wartime technology. German Enigma machines, repurposed under Soviet control to form part of a hidden listening network stretching across Siberia. The first Western hints of these installations came through the Venona project, the US Army's code-breaking effort that began in 1943 and continued into the Cold War. Among the thousands of decrypted Soviet cables, a cluster of references appeared in 1949-1951 to sites codenamed Echo, Kappa, and Lantern. These sites were listed in logistical messages about spare parts, aviation fuel, and cipher maintenance materials. Analysts at Arlington Hall Station were puzzled. Cipher equipment was not typically maintained in forward listening posts, and the level of priority assigned to these shipments suggested something beyond ordinary communications. CIA aerial reconnaissance began to fill the gaps. U-2 flights over the Soviet Far East in 1952 and 1953 photographed vast antenna arrays outside of Tiksi, Vorkuta, and along the Yenisei River. The installations were oriented in unusual configurations, not standard for radar or conventional radio relay. Yet the official line within the CIA was cautious. Analysts described them in public-facing reports as meteorological research centers. Internally, however, cables to Director Walter Bedell Smith flagged them as high-value signals intercept bases. The real breakthrough came in 1991, after the fall of the Soviet Union. Researchers with access to the Russian Ministry of Defense archives discovered internal memoranda from the Main Intelligence Directorate, GRU, a file dated November 17, 1950, signed by Colonel Sergei Ivanovich Karpov, detailed the deployment of captured Wehrmacht cipher equipment for experimental signals redirection at Outpost Lantern. The memo went further. Personnel of German origin, previously attached to cipher sections of WWII, will be seconded to GRU supervision for purposes of system adaptation. In plain terms, the Soviets were using captured German cryptographers and Enigma hardware to build hybrid intercept systems in Siberia. Why would Moscow cling to outdated Enigma technology in the age of advanced Soviet cipher machines? One theory, floated in an NSA research paper declassified in 2002, is that the Soviets discovered a peculiarity in German cipher traffic during the war, an ability to mask transmissions under certain atmospheric conditions, particularly in polar regions, where ionospheric disturbances were strongest. German naval signals officers had long experimented with Arctic frequencies, and the knowledge appears to have been carried over, perhaps even enhanced, by those brought into Soviet service. The evidence of German involvement is striking. In The archives of the Soviet Ministry of Internal Affairs, now partially open, one finds prisoner transfer orders listing specialists from Sachsenhausen and Peenemünde assigned to northern facilities indefinite service. Among them, an engineer named Rudolf Heidenreich, who before 1945 had worked at the German Army Cipher Office, WWII. His name resurfaces in a 1952 GRU payroll ledger for Site Echo, paid not in rubles but in foreign bank transfers routed through Prague. The inference is clear. German cryptographers were being kept alive, hidden in Siberian posts, working under Soviet orders. Western attempts to probe these stations often met with silence. In 1954, a US Navy reconnaissance aircraft, a P-2V Neptune, strayed near Providenia Bay. Soviet fighters intercepted and fired, forcing the aircraft to ditch. Survivors reported being interrogated specifically about cipher intercept work, rather than radar, a question line that baffled American debriefers at the time. Years later, with knowledge of the Siberian listening posts, the questions make grim sense. Testimonies from defectors add a chilling human dimension. In 1973, a GRU officer named Viktor Belenko defected to Japan, famously flying his MiG-25 to Hakodate. While most of his intelligence focused on aircraft capabilities, Belenko also described isolated camps in the tundra, where Germans lived in guarded barracks, working with old machines. He could not provide details, but his description matched the pattern of Echo, Kappa, and Lantern. American intelligence quietly filed this under unconfirmed, unwilling to press the matter publicly during delicate arms negotiations. The collapse of the Soviet Union briefly opened the door to direct investigation. In 1992, a joint Russian-American scientific expedition traveled to an abandoned signals outpost near Tiksi. Inside, they found rusted antenna masts, frozen diesel generators, and a bunker containing crates marked Reichspost 1943. Among the debris lay fragments of Enigma rotors, their wiring intact, modified with Soviet solder and labels in Cyrillic. The discovery was quietly reported in an internal Defense Intelligence Agency bulletin, but never released publicly. The expedition's photographs, smuggled into Western hands, remain some of the only visual proof of Enigma Soviet hybridization. What purpose did these posts ultimately serve? The best evidence suggests they were used to intercept long-range NATO communications, piggybacking on frequencies poorly monitored by the West. Their location in Siberia allowed for wide reception arcs across the Arctic, Scandinavia, and even the northern United States. German Enigma machinery, with its peculiar adaptations, may have been valued not for secrecy, but for its filtering properties in polar atmospheric conditions. If true, it represents a bizarre continuity. Nazi cipher machines, built to shield Germany's wartime fleet, repurposed in the service of Soviet global surveillance. By the late 1960s, the trail begins to fade. Satellite reconnaissance shows the posts shrinking in size, some decommissioned entirely. German specialists, if they survived, would have aged into obsolescence. Yet the absence of their names from any repatriation lists suggests they never left Soviet custody. Buried in permafrost, their graves, like their work, remain unmarked. The Siberian listening posts endure as a reminder of how wars bleed into each other. Technology captured in Berlin basements reappeared on the frozen tundra, manipulated by new masters, concealed from allies and enemies alike. For decades, NATO's attention was fixed on missiles and tanks, while deep in Siberia, forgotten German cryptographers tuned dials, turning the ghosts of Enigma toward the West. In the words of one NSA analyst reviewing the Venona cables, "We spent 40 years chasing Soviet ciphers, but some of what we were hearing came from a machine built in 1943, still humming under the northern lights." By April 1945, Okinawa had become the most brutal battlefield of the Pacific War. The US 10th Army, commanded by Lieutenant General Simon Bolivar Buckner Jr., faced the entrenched Japanese 32nd Army in a campaign that would cost over 200,000 lives. Among the many units defending the island, was the 32nd Independent Mixed Brigade, tasked with holding the western escarpments near Shuri. Standard histories record that this formation was shattered in the fighting at Maida Escarpment, the notorious Shuri Line, and annihilated in the final weeks of combat. Yet newly unearthed engineering reports, coupled with obscure field notes and Soviet intelligence cables, point to an unsettling possibility: that a large portion of this brigade did not die in battle, but vanished into an underground network, taking with them cargo of non-Japanese origin. The 32nd Independent Mixed Brigade was a composite unit, built around conscript infantry battalions, supported by engineers and artillery. During the May 1945 assault on Maida Escarpment, what Marines called Sugarloaf Hill, American accounts describe annihilating firepower collapsing Japanese cave defenses. By June, the brigade was listed as destroyed, but among the US Marine field notebooks archived at Quantico is a report from 2nd Lieutenant Raymond McCall, dated June 12, 1945. His patrol encountered freshly cut galleries leading inland from the escarpment, extending beyond mapped cave systems. McCall noted that timbers used for reinforcement appear foreign, metric measurements stamped in Gothic script. His sketches show crates marked with a black eagle insignia, unlike Japanese markings. Officially, McCall's notes were filed as unsubstantiated, yet parallel intelligence summaries support them. A June 18th G2 report by the 6th Marine Division states, unusual crates recovered in cave system SW of Shuri. Crates destroyed by demolition on order of higher authority, possible German origin. This report, coded G2-6MD24T, disappeared from circulation after 1946, reappearing only when declassified in the 1990s. Its language mirrors captured OSS cables from late 1944, which warned of rumors that German advisors and material were being transferred to the Pacific aboard blockade-running submarines. Several Type 9D2 U-boats, such as U-234, were known to have carried advanced technology to Japan, including jet parts, uranium oxide, and radar equipment. U-234 herself surrendered to the US in May 1945, but other boats remain unaccounted. For the fate of over 1,000 Japanese soldiers compounds the mystery. Unit rosters from the 32nd Independent Mixed Brigade list approximately 3,850 personnel in April 1945. After June, burial records and prisoner rolls account for only about 2,700. Over 1,000 are unlisted, not confirmed killed, not taken, prisoner, simply missing. Post-war Japanese memorial groups in Okinawa raised questions, but the official narrative insisted the men had been annihilated. US Army engineering reports from August 1945 tell a different story. In one, archived under file ENG OKI 1129, engineers surveying cave collapses reported discovering shaft systems extending at least 400 meters beyond map tunnels, deliberately sealed with demolition charges. The report notes possible enemy self-sealing to prevent discovery of material, but concludes with the phrase, further excavation suspended under order, HQ 8th Army, classified. The Soviets also took notice. In October 1945, a decrypted NKVD cable from Vladivostok to Moscow, Venona transcript 345-182, referred to unrecovered cargo caches in Okinawa. Documents indicate German origin. The cable goes on to request specialist inspection of collapsed shafts under Shuri Line. No evidence exists that Soviet teams ever reached Okinawa before US consolidation, but the very fact the NKVD was aware suggests intelligence leaks about the find had circulated internationally. American handling of the discovery appears deliberately obscured. In September 1945, a US Navy Seabees unit began construction of Kadena Air Base. During foundation digging, workers reportedly unearthed a tunnel mouth with German stenciling on collapsed crates. A Seabee foreman, interviewed decades later, recalled being ordered by Navy intelligence officers to bulldoze and pour concrete over the site within hours. His testimony, though anecdotal, aligns with engineering maps showing sudden reroutes of construction in October 1945 with no explanation. What could these caches have contained? Speculation ranges from radar parts to chemical weapons, even to nuclear-related material similar to that discovered aboard U-234. A captured Japanese Navy document dated March 1945, coded Tairiku Maru Manifest, lists special cargo, Berlin origin, offloaded at Sasebo and rerouted south. The manifest is incomplete, but historians believe it referred to advanced optics and gyro systems. If some of that cargo reached Okinawa, it would explain both the foreign crates and the extraordinary effort to erase their traces. The missing soldiers remain the most haunting clue. Japanese veterans groups long maintained oral traditions that their comrades were ordered into sealed tunnels under direct command, not for combat, but to safeguard material until relief came. American demolitions in June 1945 may have collapsed, those galleries with men still inside. The absence of human remains in subsequent excavations, despite massive death elsewhere on Okinawa, suggests the tunnels were never reopened. Families in Japan received no death notices. Many names were omitted from the official Yasukuni shrine rolls, a bureaucratic anomaly still unexplained. By the late 1940s, the story had been buried under layers of official silence. The National Archives in Washington contain no direct references, beyond the few declassified engineering files and McColl's forgotten field notes. Japanese post-war histories omit the 32nd Independent Mixed Brigade's disappearance, folding its men into the general slaughter. Only in recent decades, as more archives opened, has the shadow of a joint Axis cache on Okinawa re-emerged. Yet, the combination of missing men, German-marked crates, and sealed tunnels forms a puzzle with no official answer. Okinawa became a cornerstone of the American Pacific presence during the Cold War, with massive bases carved directly into the same escarpments where the brigade disappeared. Beneath the concrete and runways may still lie collapsed galleries, filled with whatever was shipped across half the world in the war's dying months. Whether weapons, documents, or simply rumors made tangible, the record is clear. Something was there, and it was meant never to be found. The lost battalion of Okinawa remains entombed in silence. 1,000 men and their cargo buried not only in limestone, but in the suppressed layers of history. In May 1945, Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz ordered the unconditional surrender of all German naval forces. Across Europe and the Atlantic, U-boat commanders surfaced, hoisted black flags, and surrendered to Allied patrols. In theory, the war beneath the seas had ended. Yet in the South Atlantic, long after the capitulation, Allied naval intelligence began recording a disturbing pattern: phantom sonar contacts, encrypted transmissions in Kriegsmarine frequencies, and eventually, the unexplained arrival of German submarines in Argentina. The official narrative acknowledges only 2 boats, U-530 and U-977, that reached Mar del Plata after the war. But Argentine naval archives and declassified US Navy communiques point to a third, erased from registries, whose cargo and passengers were never accounted for. This hidden chapter became known in intelligence circles under the codename Operation Harbormaster. On July 10, 1945, the Argentine Navy announced the surrender of U-530 at Mar del Plata. The submarine had left Kiel in April, supposedly for combat patrol, but surrendered without having fired a shot. Its captain, Oberleutnant Otto Wermuth, refused to explain his route or mission. A month later, on August 17th, U-977 arrived, commanded by Oberleutnant Heinz Schäfer, after a 66-day submerged voyage using snorkel technology. Schäfer claimed his voyage was an attempt to avoid capture, yet his logbook conspicuously omitted 2 weeks of activity. Both incidents were reported in Allied naval cables and became footnotes in post-war history. But buried in the records of the US Naval Attaché in Buenos Aires is a series of special intelligence reports dated July 1945, referencing 2 unidentified contacts approaching Argentine coast, believed to be Type 1D vessels, possible cargo transport. The intrigue deepens with a set of Argentine naval communiques, partially released in 1992 after the fall of the junta. A dispatch dated July 19, 1945, from Captain Hector Vernengo Lima, commander of Naval Base Mar del Plata. Records: second arrival registered. Vessel delivered passengers under sealed orders. Transfer conducted with military police present. Logs sealed. Crew dispersed under restricted custody. The language implies that another U-boat arrived between U-530 and U-977, yet no official German record exists of such a vessel. Kriegsmarine archives seized by the Allies list U-530 and U-977, but make no mention of a third submarine in the South Atlantic. The erasure appears deliberate. What was delivered remains the enduring mystery. Testimony collected in the 1950s by OSS officers in exile networks across South America mentions sealed steel containers offloaded at night under armed guard. Some accounts describe these containers being transported inland by Argentine military trucks to remote sites in Patagonia. One OSS report, coded X3579, states bluntly, "Believed cargo is technological in nature, possibly nuclear or advanced propulsion material. Local authorities non-cooperative, possible collusion." The phrasing reflects American fears of Nazi scientific knowledge escaping the net of Operation Paperclip and falling into neutral or hostile hands. Crew names are another anomaly. POW rosters list 54 men from U-530 and 32 from U-977. Yet Allied interrogators noted inconsistencies. Several crewmen gave false or conflicting hometowns, and 2 were later discovered to have been Luftwaffe signals officers, not submariners. If a third U-boat delivered passengers of importance, scientists, SS officers, or couriers, those men never appeared in official custody. Argentine intelligence archives, still restricted, are rumored to contain sealed files on guests received in 1945, some of whom later integrated into local German communities in Bariloche and Córdoba under assumed identities. Naval intercepts from the period provide a chilling corroboration. In late July 1945, British listening posts at Ascension Island picked up shortwave transmissions in Kriegsmarine cipher patterns. Though mostly garbled, one message fragment referred to Harbormaster successful, awaiting further. Analysts puzzled over the codename. Harbormaster does not appear in any surviving German operational orders. Some historians argue it was an Allied label retroactively applied, but the intercept suggests otherwise. It may have been a Kriegsmarine internal codename for the clandestine landings, transmissions intended for a command structure that no longer officially existed. The absence of the third boat in German records may be explained by deliberate omission. Toward the war's end, several U-boats were removed from fleet roles under orders marked Geheime Kommandosache, Regenbogen, Top Secret, Rainbow. While Regenbogen is usually associated with Dönitz's scuttling order, fragmentary documents indicate it was also applied to missions so sensitive they were struck from standard logs. One such vessel, believed to be U-1235, was officially recorded as sunk in April 1945 in the North Atlantic by US destroyer escorts. Yet no wreck has ever been found. Could U-1235, or another boat under a false designation, have been the phantom vessel at Mar del Plata? In the years that followed, rumors swirled. Argentine newspapers in 1947 briefly reported that crates from German submarines had been transported to a secluded ranch in Patagonia. US diplomats pressed for details, but the Argentine government dismissed the stories as sensationalism. In 1950, FBI files noted sightings of former SS officers in southern Argentina, some allegedly arriving after 1945. None of these claims were confirmed, but their persistence reflects the shadow of Operation Harbormaster. Even Adolf Eichmann's eventual capture in Buenos Aires in 1960 seemed to confirm suspicions that post-war Argentina had been a safe harbor for more than just refugees. By the late Cold War, US intelligence treated the matter as closed. A 1978 CIA analytical report concluded, no substantive evidence of Nazi atomic material transfer to Argentina. Allegations of third U-boat arrival considered unverified. Yet the report relied solely on German naval records already known to be incomplete. The Argentine Naval Communique, NKVD, references to missing cargo in the South Atlantic and intercepted transmissions remain unexplained. Silence persists, even as physical evidence, the supposed containers, wrecks, or documents, never surfaced. The story of Operation Harbormaster is not simply a tale of submarines or lost cargo. It is emblematic of how the end of World War II bled into the Cold War. Technology, intelligence, and personnel scattered across the globe, absorbed into the shadows of new conflicts. The Atlantic, in 1945, was supposed to be a theater of closure. Instead, it became the backdrop for one final act of disappearance. A submarine that should not exist, a cargo that was never declared, and a host nation unwilling to answer questions. The silent fleet remains unacknowledged, but its wake can still be traced in the gaps of history, gaps carefully maintained by those who had something to gain and everything to lose from keeping its story buried. The pages close, but the silence is louder than any confession. In the gaps of record and memory, danger still waits, unfinished, unspoken, unresolved. What was buried beneath ice, sealed in steel, or scattered in the ocean's depths has not vanished, only changed its disguise. Some truths are too heavy to declare, too volatile to name, and so they linger, haunting the margins, reminding us that history's darkest chapters are never truly past, they are only hidden.